So this is Idiot with a Library Card. My name's Bennett. Today I'm going to talk about a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. The foreword's by Cornel West. Sorry, been sick. Haven't been able to set my voice right, so this is going to sound a little nasally and groggly in the throat. So The New Jim Crow, it's funny. I read a lot of libertarian books. It's sort of my political lean. And her Michelle Alexander's view on the drug war actually falls in with a lot of books I've read from the right. And so they agree a lot on certain things. Civil forfeiture, she's not for it, and I know a lot of libertarian types aren't for it either. And I think, and she's also not for what the war on drugs has done to police power and police equipment. And it's funny because I think there's a lot of agreement on both sides about how to fix this issue and what we need to do, and that criminal justice reform needs to happen. I actually think, depending on what happens with the midterms, and actually maybe even no matter how the midterms turn out, I think you may see a crime. It's not even going to be a crime bill from the Trump administration. It'll probably be more of a criminal justice reform. It seems like he's leaning in that direction with his best buddy Kanye West. Hopefully Kanye West won't touch it, because there will be all sorts of crazy things about Superman hats and all that. But I think a criminal justice reform bill is coming, and it's important. The problem is, and this book is very well written. It's very well researched. It's a really good book. I'd recommend anyone read it. I have two problems with it. Mainly she does what a lot of African American feminist study types do, is they make everything, all the problems in the world are white supremacy or the patriarchy. And one of the things she does in the beginning, the very beginning of the book, it's the foreword, she basically says, if you don't agree with me, don't read this book. And it's a really odd thing to say. If I'm going to question whether mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow, which, by the way, I don't think it is. I don't think mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. I disagree with the premise of the book, but I think there's important things we could work out together that would fix some of these problems. Her basic instinct is to say that, well, even if we fix this problem, the white man will find another way to keep black people down. And I don't know if that's what's happening here. The mass incarceration and the expansion of the drug policing has clearly affected communities of color far more than it has white communities. Now, I don't know if that's, I wouldn't necessarily jump to it's because of racism. I think some of it is because of racism, but I don't think it's not a conspiratorial plot. Like, we don't have secret white people meetings where we go, how do we keep the black man down? It doesn't happen. And she uses some really weird wording that doesn't pan out. Like, she likes to say a racial caste system. We have a racial caste system in this country, but we don't. There are black people all throughout the economic structure of this country. There's a lot of middle-class black folks. And so it's not a caste system. You can get out of it. Now, I think some black folks get stuck with hard circumstances and they can't get out of it. And these are issues we need to fix, but it doesn't help to say, oh, well, the conservatives are setting up a racial caste system. There's no winner there. Because the conservatives go, well, we're not, and why would we work with you if you think such terrible things about us? And she says a lot of things, especially in the beginning of the book. I'm getting to the meat of the book, and the meat of the book is really good with the drug war, with the mass incarceration. And it's funny, the best parts of the book for me are when she's not talking about race. Because when she starts talking about race, it gets conspiratorial. It gets very much like there are these secret meetings where white folks get together and we say, oh, well, gosh, slavery had to end, but we got Jim Crow, and then we got together and Jim Crow ended, so now we have mass incarceration. It doesn't happen like that. I think it happens more natural, more organic, I should say. More, you pass a few crime bills, you get a little scared about drugs, and you set a war on drugs, and it's affected many people. It's affected a lot of poor whites too, and Hispanics and other folks, but it has definitely affected Black communities the hardest, and that's an issue we need to address. But I think addressing criminal justice reform would be the way to do it, and you wouldn't have to racialize it that way. And her thing is that even if we fix the criminal justice system, there would be, if we don't address the underlying racism, and I don't even know if it's there, and when you start looking for it, you'll find it if you're going to look for it. When you're looking for things like that, you can always manipulate your point of view to find it. She's going to find it no matter what. She didn't go into this book saying, I wonder if there's underlying racism. She is sure there's underlying racism. So my main problems, when she talks in the beginning of the book, she sort of goes through the history of slavery, and she says some really ludicrous things. I think the one thing she says is that race is a recent invention, and I feel like there's no book, like read a book from Roman times, and there's all sorts of racial things there. It's one of Tacitus's. I wouldn't call it a folly. I mean, he was writing back then. He didn't know the Nazis were going to use his works, but he talks a lot about race. So to say race is a recent invention. The other thing she says is that federalism was created to keep the institution of slavery. And no, that's like, to me, and I really thought, I'm a fan of nuclear power. I think it's important, and it's a conversation for a different day. But it would be like saying nuclear power was created so that we could have nuclear waste. And slavery was a byproduct of the federalist system. I mean, you probably still have slavery even if we did a different system, but the setup of a federal system where we have states and the federal government and they have areas of operation, it certainly extended slavery longer than it should have, but slavery should have never happened, so you have some issues there anyway. And these are the issues that, it's one of those things where you want to work with these people. You want to say, hey, listen, let's fix criminal justice. And then we'll move on to the next thing, and we'll probably go our different ways, and maybe that will happen. It just sounds like she's so convinced that even if we fix criminal justice, it's going to be another racist thing. And I just don't see it. I don't see it happening that way. I think, because there's a lot of, and this is the other thing is, and I agree with her, you can't say, oh, racism doesn't exist, or even if you're going to dispute her racial caste system, you can't necessarily point to Barack Obama and Oprah all the time and say, well, see, there's no caste system, although it does. Think Barack Obama and Oprah do sort of debunk a little bit the racial caste system, because, I mean, the one is the largest media mogul, and the other one was president of the United States. And I don't know if you know how a caste system works, but generally you're born into your job or your place, and you're stuck there. And see, she doesn't like to use the word class. I think partly for the same reason. I mean, a caste system is a much harsher word. I don't know. I don't know if books like this are helpful in that you use shocking language. It's not like Howard Stern shocking. You sort of over exaggerate the problem, and then it creates more of a groundswell to fix the problem. But the other thing it does is it turns people off from your argument because they think that you're being ridiculous. There isn't a racial caste system because, I think most people listening work with black folks and black folks that are higher on the corporate ladder than them and lower on the corporate ladder at the same place. I mean, you just see that it doesn't quite work that way. And I get that there are black communities that are very downtrodden, but people come out of those communities and are successful. So again, it seems like she knows the definition of the caste system. She defines it, but she is a woman of color who is a very successful lawyer who wrote a New York Times bestseller. I'm sorry, that disproves that there's a caste system. But I think I understand what she's saying. And the other thing she says is that felons are legally discriminated against. And that's true. I don't quite know if that's something you want to necessarily stop. We need criminal justice reform. It's clear as day, especially with drug laws. We have to unmilitarize our police. I think that's a huge problem. I think every time there's a riot, you don't want the police going in with machine guns and all that riot gear. Now, when I was a kid, not so much, and I don't quite remember, but I believe in the 60s, you'd call the National Guard. And I always thought this is what the National Guard's for. The police should police. National Guard should be for riotous emergencies and other such things. So, and what the police have gotten away with the drug war. The stop and frisk is clearly I don't see how you could read the Fourth Amendment and go, yeah, stop and frisk seems constitutional. It's not. And I don't even care if it, well, I shouldn't say I don't care if it's saving lives, but you can't, we shouldn't place a premium of safety over freedom. It shouldn't happen. I understand if the police are taking someone and they search for weapons, I'm fine with that to a certain degree, but there may even be a rule. I mean, when you get a search warrant, they have to look for certain things. If they find something else illegal, they can't or shouldn't be allowed to arrest you for that. They look for certain things. If they're looking for drugs and they find, an illegal weapon, they can't necessarily take you in for that. But I'm sure they do sometimes, and it's just the drug war has warped the relationship with the police, and these are issues that need to be dealt with, especially in African American communities. It just isn't helpful to over exaggerate it, and to talk about like felons should be able to vote after they serve their time, and I believe in most states they are. I don't know if it's a lifetime ban for voting. It shouldn't be. Once you serve your time, once you're off parole, you should be allowed to vote. You're a normal citizen as far as I'm concerned. But she talks about job and housing discrimination. Now, that's a little tougher. I think someone renting to you and someone employing you has the right to ask you if you've committed a crime. And I get that it makes it harder for people, but you might actually, and this is the other thing, is you might actually hurt the black community by saying, oh, you can't ask those questions. And I'm not sure if exactly that's what she's saying, but it almost sounds like she is. Because if you're going to play the numbers game, more African Americans per person are felons than white folks. And I mean, there are a bunch of reasons why. We could talk about race, but some of it is just that black folks right now in this time of history are committing more crimes than white folks. So what you would get is almost if you couldn't ask that question, would you then hire a black person? You'd be playing, well, I don't know. I mean, what if they're a felon? If you couldn't ask the question. So asking the question may actually help certain people. And listen, I think there are a lot of organizations that hire felons and they try to get them back on their feet. So I think as a society we need to be more forgiving, but that's probably another show too. So I would say this, the new Jim Crow overstates a lot. It's got a lot of social justicey language in it, which is some people's bag. It's not my bag, but whatever. Some people like that. It's a really well-researched book. It's a really well-written book. It's very well organized. If you wanted to pick a few topics from it and just read about that, it's well organized that you could just find those few topics. It's funny, the mass incarceration part of it I find very interesting. It's some of the history part. It's through the lens of a African American studies, or feminist studies or women's studies. Those type of schools that are social justice schools, and they just have a speak and a historical viewpoint, and I mean I could go off on that for hours about the problem with those types of schools. I mean, I actually think it should almost be a minor. Like, you could minor in African American studies, but you'd have to study history, and those schools have such a monolithic viewpoint that it's hard to. It's just tough to see. You know their point of view before you crack open the book, and their view on history and their speak. They have that patriarchy, everything's white supremacy type speech. So if you can get past that, and you know what, it doesn't fill the whole book. The book, again, is very well written. It's a very good anti-war on drugs book. There's a book I read that is called "It Doesn't Matter If You Do." It's sort of also anti war on drugs book from the right, from the libertarian. And these two, I forget who wrote that. I'll have to check. Maybe put it in the show notes. But I think it was Pete or something. And this Michelle Alexander would have a lot to talk about with the drug war, which is a problem. It's something we need to reform, but I don't know if we need to reform it on a race-based angle. And this might be the problem. This might be why it might be hard to get one of these bills passed. It's something we need to do, but if you're going to make it all about racism and that's the actual problem, I think you're missing what we need to do with the criminal justice system and how we need to reform it. So that's my thoughts on this book. I haven't put out a show for a while. I've just been crazy busy with a new job and all that, but I will try to put out more shows. Hope you like this one.